Hello, everybody. How to prepare for interviews in a second language is the topic of today's LinkedIn Live with myself, Sandra Wood, and my colleague, Megan Nichols. We'd like to briefly introduce ourselves if you haven't joined us before. My name's Sandra. I'm a German language coach in Zurich, and I work with international professionals, and I help them speak German confidently in a work and social environment. And Megan, hi, I think you do something quite similar, right?
Yes, exactly, which is why this works, Sandra. So if you haven't joined before, I'm Meg and I coach English. And this is for anybody that's using English in a work context or moving to an English-speaking country to build confidence and prepare for situations like interviews, which are normally quite daunting, especially if they're in a second language. So yeah, we thought we'd give you some top tips today for whichever language you're preparing for. These tips are transferable between languages, right?
Absolutely, yes. So can you give some examples of what types of interviews or what types of clients you help prepare for interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's the distinction between internal and external interviews. So sometimes my clients are already working within a company and they have to interview to get a promotion. They want to kind of climb the career ladder but stay within the same company. So often they're not meeting the interviewer for the first time. They're not needing to explain a lot of their professional experience. Whereas the external interviews are normally for a completely new job, completely new role, sometimes a new country. So you're normally starting from scratch to go through this process, and it's normally multi-stage. Do you have a similar experience with your clients, Sandra?
Yeah, they tend to be more external interviews. So sometimes my clients have maybe even been made redundant and they're actively looking for a job. And they are usually senior roles, so team lead and even more senior, not necessarily board level, but I tend to work with clients who work in some of the Swiss industries, such as financial services, pharma industry. There's lots of IT people, architects, marketing. I've also had a few. So yes, very much senior roles, and people want to advance their careers. And that's why they're looking for that next level challenge. And I think we all know that interviews can be very stressful, even in your native language. Why are they more stressful in a second language?
Because you have to think about everything you're doing a little bit more. And as much as we tell our clients and anybody watching not to overthink, I think this is a normal human reaction. You're having the vocabulary that's maybe not as familiar to you, the expressions. So it just adds that extra level of pressure. You want to speak at the right speed. You want to present yourself in a professional way. So all the things that you're doing in your native language, and then you're adding that additional stress. I think there's also like this fear surrounding it of sounding less intelligent, which is totally not the case because we both work with experts in their field and very qualified professional people. But there's the fear that when that becomes in a second or maybe even a third language, that the perceived intelligence drops. And I think that's a mindset shift rather than a language shift. Yes. Is there anything else that you have seen that makes it extra challenging?
Yes, I think it's certainly around preparation as well. You know, how do I prepare not just what I'm going to be saying, but how am I going to be presenting that in a foreign language? So I think the key thing is when you're stressed because your language isn't perfect, make sure you're authentic, be yourself, because you're very likely going to be hired because of your skills and also your personality, how well you fit into a team, whether you're a match with the company culture or not. So all of these things are more important than your language skills, and people have invited you to that interview, so they'll be aware of the fact that this is not your native language and they're not going to expect you to be perfect. So that's very, very important. Just be authentic. And I think, yes, the fact that it's in a foreign language just adds to that cognitive overload. What do we mean by that cognitive overload?
There's just a lot going on at once. There's a lot to multitask. You're not only using your active listening skills to listen to the question and understand it, you're also trying to formulate the grammar. So maybe they've asked about something in the past. Are you going to use the past perfect, the past continuous, all of this kind of thing? Then you're thinking, okay, what vocabulary can I use to showcase my skills without repeating myself? So mentally, you're juggling a lot of things at once, and that can lead to this cognitive overload. I also think it's important to mention the cultural differences. This is something that I'm passionate about in my sessions, because you can learn a language almost perfectly, but if you don't understand the culture of the person you're speaking to, then it's not going to be understood as well as you would like. So for example, I give the US as an example because they are often a lot more enthusiastic, sometimes perceived as arrogant. And this definitely comes across in interview technique and interview style, because you have to showcase your skills. You have to be excited and you have to talk about yourself. In comparison to maybe German speaking cultures, you have a better insight, but my perception is they're a little bit more modest.
Yes, there are introverted and extroverted cultures, I would say. Say, for example, the culture of Switzerland is definitely an introverted culture, and it may well come across as a bit arrogant if you're too confident when you're talking about your skills and what you've achieved, which is perhaps quite natural in, say, the US culture. I think those two are quite, are pretty much opposites, really.
It can be really challenging because you want to come across as confident, or maybe you don't know how to handle it. So it can be an extra thing to think about.
Yes, and this is so important to consider when you prepare for an interview. So how do we go about preparing for an interview generally, and especially in a foreign language? It is about so much more than just vocabulary. So usually people worry about not knowing the right words, but at the end of the day, you can't memorize your answers anyway. You might want to say all these nice things, but you don't know what they're going to be asking. So you can't really, apart from the very usual questions, you can't really predict what they want to know. So any tips we can give in terms of how to prepare?
Yeah, I would definitely advise moving away from preparing this script that then you struggle to memorize anyway. So I think if you can get a clear structure in your answers and maybe bullet point some notes that are more flexible and can be adapted to different questions, I think that's going to be helpful. I like to talk about the STAR technique with my clients. So this is when we think of a situation, a task, an action that you took, and then the result of this action. And this is just a helpful mnemonic or way of remembering to keep the structure of showing how your action brought about the result that they are asking for. And then you can supplement this by thinking of some key achievements that you could use as examples, because the more examples you can give, the more tangible it feels rather than theoretical. What would you add?
Yes, I think this is actually an area where many people fail, because recruiters don't want to hear a list of characteristics, but they want these tangible examples that show how you've implemented your skills. So it's a bit of storytelling. And, going back to your example, so what's the situation? You've had maybe negative feedback from clients. What's your task? You want to make them happy. So you need to take action. What's that going to be? You maybe give them a discount on the next big order, and you've got a result. So tell a story as opposed to just listing maybe the end results, but how did you get there? And when you're telling that story, you might sometimes find that you need to quickly think about a word, or you don't quite know how to phrase that sentence. So I would recommend having some transition words and linking phrases to buy you thinking time. So it could be some, relatively long sentence, such as an example of where I was able to demonstrate my outstanding people skills was when, and already you've had a few seconds there to maybe just remember that verb form. But it's never going to be a disaster, even if you don't have the right verb form. You need to tell your story. So being authentic is just really, really essential.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And then in terms of like language, because if you're doing it in a second language, I would say that it's really important to simplify. We've spoken about this many times on our LinkedIn lives, but we're really aiming for the clarity here rather than the perfect grammar. So even if we can't get the right verb form, as you mentioned, if we can simplify the language and make it as easy as possible for the person who's interviewing us to understand what we're saying, telling this story, I think that's going to be a lot more beneficial than coming up with extravagant vocabulary or sentence structures.
Yes, very much so. And I also give my clients the tip that they should say things out loud. I think this is totally underrated often, because people read and write and they think, oh, yes, I know what I'm going to say, I understand. But the second you have to actually say words out loud, you maybe realize that you're a bit unsure about the pronunciation, and then you can double check that. And it does help you remember words and phrases so much better by saying them out loud. Your brain makes these new connections, and that is so helpful in terms of preparation for an interview as well. So yes,
I learned this week that it takes 100 muscles in your face to be able to speak. And I think that's amazing, because if you're writing or you're reading, you're not using any of these muscles. But when we speak, we need to practice and train them. So definitely this is a great tip.
I didn't realize I had 100 muscles in my face. So.
Exactly. You need to practice using them in like the shapes and the way that they go together to pronounce the words.
So when it comes to vocab, do we need to prepare vocab for the interview?
I think avoid the complex things, but I think if you are looking at a specific industry or a specific role, of course, it's going to come up, and it's helpful to have those specific words in the other language. Make sure you know how to pronounce them, make sure you know how to use them, but they will help your skills shine through and help you present as a professional in that industry.
Agreed. So perhaps we could just briefly summarize some of the common mistakes that people make. We've just mentioned, so don't memorize scripts and try and avoid translating directly from your native language, but instead, have some stories ready, and don't overcomplicate the vocabulary, but use simple words that everybody can understand, because communication is about understanding what the other person wants to get across. It's really about the successful outcome of that, as opposed to like sounding super intelligent by using the most formal words that people would maybe only use in writing. So it is a conversation, a job interview, and in conversations we use more informal language.
Absolutely. I always advise my clients to prepare some follow-up questions as well. I think this is a common mistake that people often forget. They think, okay, I've got to the end of the interview, they've asked me everything they wanted, and a common question from the interviewer is, do you have anything to ask us? And I think it's such a big mistake to sit back and go, no, I know everything, it's fine, thank you, because that's a great opportunity to find out more about the company, about the role, about your colleagues. So don't just sit back and say nothing. Prepare something in advance would be a top tip from me.
Yes, this is where you can set yourself apart by showing that curiosity and maybe having a bit of a different angle compared to other people that they interview. And I think also you're obviously going to be nervous, but try and not speak too fast. Use the adrenaline. It'll be very helpful, but slow down. So even when you think you've slowed down, slow down some more, so that perhaps it feels as if you're talking quite slowly, which you're probably not. This is also quite funny how our brain sort of perceives the speed at which we talk. It is essential that you talk at a slow pace so you can be understood clearly and you have the time to pronounce the words and the intonation, etc. So yes, try and keep those nerves under control a bit.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that one. And I get so excited. Do you have any mindset tips that people could take with them, as well as the language? How can we adapt to an interview in another language?
Yes, very much about perfectionism. So try and let go of that and just accept that it's going to be imperfect. As we said at the beginning, they've invited you because of your skills and the experience that you bring, what you can deliver for them. And they are already aware that this is not your first language. So focus more on building a connection with them, a genuine connection with the people that you're talking to, show some curiosity, and really work on that storytelling to really wow them by what you've achieved so far. And that will then make them forget about any language issues, which they probably don't focus on in the first place.
Yes, I love that. Hopefully you should see it more as a strength, that you're able to speak a second or multiple languages. So it's definitely an accolade and achievement already to get to that stage in another language.
Anything else from your side?
Yeah, I think reframing, like if you're nervous, you mentioned the adrenaline as a useful tool, and I really echo this. Using those nerves as energy, I think, can be really valuable, because it is a stressful experience in any language. So you're not trying to avoid the stress completely. Of course, it's going to be that situation where you're almost put on the spot. So instead of trying to make it all go away, just reframe it in a positive direction, I think is easier said than done, but something I would definitely try and encourage.
Absolutely. And that's what also both of us do in our coaching sessions with our clients. It's never just about the language. If you come to us specifically for job interview practice, for example, we will be working on that with you. So it's about mindset and technique, storytelling, just as much as, say, German in my case, or Meg in your case, English.
Yes.
And yes, if you want some more advice from us, if you have any questions, you can get in touch either by sending us a message on LinkedIn, or in my case, you can also follow me on my YouTube channel. It's called @German by Sandra, where I post some videos and also other content there for you. So you have all the latest tips and techniques when it comes to improving your German, so you can speak it confidently, both in a work and also social environment, so you can integrate better into Swiss society. And if you'd like to follow Meg, what can we do? Where can we find you?
Yes, I'm also on YouTube, Mega Language Coach, Instagram, and I've recently started a TikTok, so I'm dipping my toe in there and would love to connect with people, not only looking for English professionally, but also I've launched a new course for expats. So if you are moving to an English-speaking country or working in an English-speaking country, then I'd love to help you get those practical skills, visas, bureaucracy, housing, all of those things that are challenging in your own language. So yeah, I would love to connect with you as well.
That sounds fantastic. And thank you so much, Meg, for joining me today, and for everybody who's watching. It's great to have you here, and see you soon. Thank you very much.
Ciao.
Cheers.